India is the new golden child of the global economy. This year it overtook China to become the world's most populous country. It has the fifth largest economy in the world, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi says he expects it will be the third largest economy within the next 4 years. That's a stunning rise for a country that was in 13th place as recently as the 1980s. And today, with the trade war between China and the US showing no sign of coming to an end, and tensions over Taiwan on the rise, many people expect that Western businesses will shift production to India to avoid the risk of doing business in a country that might just be at war with the West in the coming years. And in fact, that shift of production is happening. Manufacturers like toy maker Hasbro and smartphone maker Foxconn have opened up manufacturing facilities in India. But the reality is that India has taken only a very small chunk of global manufacturing, and the country is not ready to take over from China as the world's manufacturing hub. So why is India not going to take over from China as Asia's economic tiger? In this video, we will answer this question. But before we do, make sure to subscribe to this channel to get updates on all our latest news and analysis. And if you like this video, hit the like button and help us spread the word. For all the talk about multinational corporations leaving China, the reality is that for many of them, India isn't an option, and neither are other countries. This past spring, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, went to China and met the country's new premier, Li Kang, to reaffirm Apple's commitment to China. During that trip, he made commitments that made it clear what China really is in the global economy. Cook said, "There's a confusion about China. The popular conception is that companies come to China because of low labor cost. I'm not sure what part of China they go to, but the truth is China stopped being the low labor cost country many years ago, and that is not the reason to come to China from a supply point of view. The reason is because of the skill and the quantity of skill in one location and the type of skill it is. The products we do require really advanced tooling, and the precision that you have to have, the tooling and the working with the materials that we do are state-of-the-art, and the tooling skill is very deep here. In the US, you could have a meeting of tooling engineers and I'm not sure we could fill the room. In China, you could fill multiple football fields. That right there explains what China has become today, a center of high-tech manufacturing that can't be replicated anywhere in the world, even in the United States. China's economic reforms began in the 1970s, and in the 1980s and 1990s, it made itself into a hub for low-cost manufacturing of simple goods, like clothing and plastic toys. But as the years went on, Chinese workers and businesses began to accumulate ever greater manufacturing skills. At the same time, the digital revolution was rapidly changing the nature of the global economy. There's a big difference between manufacturing something simple like cutlery and paper plates and manufacturing something complex like a smartphone with a microprocessor and a touchscreen. That type of manufacturing requires a complex supply chain and precision in the production process. China has a lock on this type of manufacturing. By comparison, India has neither the expertise nor the ability to create the expertise needed. To understand why, we need to understand the background story of India's economy. For decades after India gained independence from Britain in 1948, it ran a semi-socialist government-controlled economy. Although the country was officially politically neutral, not taking sides in the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, in practice its sympathies leaned towards the Soviets. India drew inspiration from the Soviet Union's transformation of its society from an agricultural, peasant-dominated nation to a manufacturing-based industrial economy. Like Stalinist Russia, India grew its economy according to 5-year plans, which resulted in most of its largest businesses being government-owned. China also used to have a state-owned, state-run economy, but starting in 1978, the Chinese government embarked on a plan to reform its economy and start building the country's wealth through free market reforms. That's not what happened in India, where change was forced on the country from the outside. In the early 1990s, the Soviet Union collapsed and India lost its largest trading partner. Its economy went into a steep decline, and to pay off its rapidly growing debts, the country had to take a bailout from the IMF. That bailout came with conditions. India would have to reform its government-controlled economy and start implementing free market reforms, such as ending its protectionist policies of high tariffs and reducing subsidies to industries. For the most part, those reforms worked. Since the 1990s, India's economy has roughly doubled in size every 5 years, but its starting point was so low that even after 3 decades of rapid growth, India's economy is still very small on a per-person basis. India's per capita GDP today is just 1/6 that of China's. India has become a top 5 economy not by being an economic power, but simply by the sheer size of its population. Its 1.4 billion people is its strength. strength, yet those people today are considerably less wealthy than the people of China. And one major reason for that is that India's workforce is not nearly as skilled or as well utilized as China's. Although India's unemployment rate sits at around 7 or 8%, its youth unemployment rate is around 40%. That makes a huge difference in India because it has a very young population. Half the people in the country are below the age of 25, and a large chunk of the population works in the informal economy, that is, unlicensed businesses paying people under the table. This is the legacy of India's old socialist economy. For decades, India had a system that locals called the license Raj, a complex web of government bureaucracy that anyone who wanted to start a business had to go through. Up to 80 different government agencies had to license a business before it could start operating. To make that happen, you had to hire lawyers, and most people couldn't afford that. So most of the small businesses started in India were in the informal economy. In other words, they were illegal, unlicensed businesses that didn't pay taxes. Even as India reformed its economy, the informal economy remained in place, and as recently as 2018, it was estimated that more than half of the population worked under the table. This informal economy has created a massive drag on economic growth in India because these businesses and the people who work for them pay no taxes. This has a number of implications for India. One is that many Indians are better off working in the informal economy, tax-free, than they would be if they took a job in the official economy. This creates an artificial labor shortage. Many businesses that set up shop in India are surprised to discover in this country of 1.4 billion people, they can't find enough workers to fill job positions. Another impact of the informal economy is that the country hasn't had enough of a tax base to build proper infrastructure. In China, as free market reforms brought results, the government used increased tax revenue to build modern infrastructure like highways and railroads. These are essential aspects of building a modern economy because without this infrastructure, you can't expect businesses to set up manufacturing. No one will build a factory in a place where they can't get those goods to market. And today, one of the biggest differences between India and China is the size and quality of their infrastructure. China has 161,000 kilometers of grade-separated highways, while India has 4,700 kilometers. China has 150,000 kilometers of rail, while India has 69,000. In fact, much of India's infrastructure is so poor that 40% of the country's fruit rots before it reaches the market. Another problem caused by India's low tax base is a lack of investment in education. A skilled workforce is absolutely necessary to building a modern economy, and while India does have some good schools and universities, there aren't nearly enough of them, and not nearly enough people have access for the country to start truly building a modern economy. The country spends less on education than almost any other Asian country, about 3.1% of GDP, compared to 4.8% globally and 5.7% in East Asia. Countries like China, Korea, and even Iran spend more money educating their workforce than India does, and the quality of that education is low. Surveys show that many employers consider the country's job training programs and university degrees to be worthless. They say about half the people they hire out of school don't actually have the qualifications their diploma says they do. This too is a reason why business leaders like Apple's Tim Cook don't see India as a reasonable alternative. The government of India is aware of the problems that the country's informal economy is causing, and it has taken some steps to try to fix the problem. But those steps have been heavy-handed, and it's not clear if they've worked. In 2016, the government announced it was demonetizing the country's 500 rupee and 1,000 rupee notes. People would have to go to the bank and replace these bills with new ones because the old ones would stop being legal tender within a few months. This caused chaos throughout the economy. There were huge lineups at banks. There were shortages of bills that lasted for months after the demonetization, and social strife broke out as people struggle with the lack of cash. The whole idea behind this move was to force people to take their money to banks in the hope that this would make them declare their incomes and start paying taxes. It's unclear if it worked. A 2021 survey found that the size of India's informal economy had shrunk to around 20% of the economy from 52% several years earlier. But Indian government revenue saw no major spike during this time. Its growth remained at the same trend line that it had been on before the demonetization. It's likely that the massive shrinkage of the informal economy was due to the COVID-19 pandemic rather than the changes to currency. If that's the case, then India's informal economy will now start to bounce back from the pandemic, and in the years to come, the country could end up in the same place it was before, with too little money to educate the population and too little money to build the infrastructure needed to attract major foreign investors. In other words, the day when India takes over China as the leading economy in Asia is still very, very, very far off, if it ever comes at all. If you like this video, please hit the like button, as it helps us spread the word about this channel. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications on our latest news and analysis. In the meantime, check out these videos here to learn more. Thanks for watching.